This is a story you'll definitely want to hear to the very end. Chapter 1. The Shot in the Dark. In my family, I tell you without reservation, there reigned a cult of predictability. We were one of those clans where each member's life path was charted before their birth, like a score in a well-worn opera house. My father, David Miller, a methodical man, a man of unshakable routines, managed to live by a 5-year plan of his own making, even in an era of wild market fluctuations. My mother, Helen, a creature of nervous disposition and high-strung sensibilities, directed all her vibrant energy toward maintaining perfect order in the house and in her thoughts, believing that any surprise was a harbinger of the apocalypse. And I, Catherine, their only daughter, had absorbed this spirit with my mother's milk. A prestigious university, a predictable career as a translator, a romance with an equally predictable colleague. Everything was moving along a well-trodden path. And at the center of this universe of ours, as quiet and steadfast as an extinct volcano, was Grandma Anne. Anne Peterson, a sweet old soul of 82 years, whose life, it seemed, consisted of knitting endless scarves, watching soap operas about unrequited love, and baking apple pies, whose aroma was the very symbol of our little world's stability. She was our family heirloom, a living reminder that islands of serenity still existed in the world. Her past seemed to us as clear and uncomplicated as the pattern on her favorite tablecloth. She was born, studied to be a librarian, worked her whole life in the local library, buried my grandfather, a test pilot, and had since lived a quiet widow's life, surrounded by our, admittedly, somewhat condescending care. We loved her with that calm, slightly patronizing love one has for children or pets, expecting no surprises from them. And then, on one rainy October Sunday, that extinct volcano suddenly erupted, threatening to bury all our notions of order and common sense under the lava of our domestic bliss. We were sitting at the table, decorously consuming those very apple pies. Outside, the sky wept mournfully. Father was discussing the fall of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Mother was complaining about the dampness seeping into the apartment, and I was lazily contemplating the futility of all existence. And then, Grandma, pushing aside her plate with its half-eaten pie, in a clear and surprisingly firm voice, uttered a phrase that resounded in our quiet harbor more deafeningly than a gunshot. "I'm getting married," she said. A silence fell, the kind of ringing silence in which they say you can hear an angel fly by. But this time, I am sure it was not an angel that swept over our table, but a whole legion of laughing daemons. Father froze with the fork halfway to his mouth. Mother made a sound like a strangled kitten and clutched her heart. I choked on my tea. "I'm sorry, what?" Father was the first to regain the power of speech, his face turning the color of a ripe eggplant. "Mother, this is a poor joke." "David, I never joke about matters concerning my future," Ann Peterson replied with icy calm. Her small, usually faded eyes suddenly glinted with steel. "I am getting married. His name is Arthur Devereaux." Arthur Devereaux. The name sounded alien in our modest kitchen, almost indecent. It smelled of expensive cigars, foreign travel, and adventures we only read about in pulp novels. "Who is he? Where did he come from?" Mother shrieked, her nerves, stretched taut as strings, finally snapping. "Mother, you're being deceived. He's a con man. He wants to take your apartment." "Oh, Helen, don't be so bourgeois," Grandma sighed. "I imagine Arthur has more apartments of his own than we do. As for who he is," she paused for a moment, and a mysterious, almost girlish smile appeared on her wrinkled face. "He's someone who makes the world a brighter place." That phrase, with its pompous ambiguity, finally convinced us that we were dealing with a catastrophe. Makes the world brighter. Only a streetlight or a first-rate swindler could say such a thing about himself. We began to bombard Grandma with questions. Where did they meet? How long ago? What does he do? But to all our interrogations, Ann Peterson responded with unshakable calm, fobbing us off with generalities. They met under very romantic circumstances. They had known each other long enough to understand what matters, and his line of work was highly specialized. The evening ended in a scandal. Mother took her heart medication, father paced the room muttering something about senility and guardianship, and I, looking at my grandmother's impenetrable face, felt not tenderness for the first time in my life, but fear. This was not our quiet, harmless granny. This was a strange woman holding a secret in her eyes that was beyond our grasp. As we were leaving, she stood in the doorway, small, fragile, but her figure exuded an unbending will. And when I turned back for a final look, it seemed to me that behind her, in the dim light of the hallway, a tall male shadow flickered for an instant. Or perhaps it was just a figment of my overactive imagination. That night, I understood. War had been declared, and we, her loving family, had to become a counterintelligence unit to save our resident, our grandmother, from the clutches of the mysterious recruiter named Arthur Devereux, who, damn it all, makes the world a brighter place. Chapter 2: Operation Starlight and the First Failures. The very next day, a military command center was established in our apartment. Father, being a man of systems, approached the matter with gusto. He drew a diagram on a large sheet of paper, titled Operation Starlight. Or Starlight was, of course, the mysterious Arthur who was to be exposed. Mother, true to her hypochondriac nature, scurried from corner to corner with a blood pressure monitor, predicting nervous exhaustion and a hypertensive crisis for us all. I, as the youngest and most tech-savvy, was put in charge of cyber reconnaissance. The plan was as simple as a kick in the pants. Find out everything about the enigmatic fiancé, find some dirt on him, and present it to our deluded grandmother to save her from a fatal mistake. The first phase of the operation was entrusted to me. Run him through all the databases, Kate, my father instructed, jabbing a finger at the diagram. Social media, public records, debts, criminal history. We need to know everything about him. I set to work with enthusiasm. Arthur Devereux. The name, to our profound regret, was all we had. Grandma had flatly refused to provide any more details, stating that it doesn't matter. Well, the harder the task, the more interesting. I spent several hours sifting through the internet in search of any Arthur Devereux who could theoretically turn an 82-year-old woman's head. The results were disheartening. I found 5 Arthur Devereux. One was a 12-year-old chess prodigy from Omaha. The second was a synchronized swimming coach in Miami. The third was a tire shop owner in New Jersey on probation for failing to pay child support. The fourth was the author of a monograph titled The Dialectics of Earthworm Population Development in the Midwest, and the fifth, alas, had passed away in 1987. None of them resembled the mysterious stranger who makes the world brighter. The failure on the digital front forced us to move to Plan B, devised by my mother. The plan was as subtle and cunning as she was. It was called the heart-to-heart. Mother, armed with a freshly baked apple strudel, her favorite weapon in diplomatic missions, went to her mother-in-law for negotiations. Father and I sat at home on pins and needles, awaiting news from the battlefield. 2 hours later, she returned, defeated but not broken. "It's a fiasco," she declared in a tragic whisper from the doorway. "She's as impenetrable as the Great Wall of China." According to her, the conversation had turned into a one-woman show, with Grandma taking center stage while Mother could only bat her eyelashes in confusion. To all attempts to find out details about the fiancé, Ann Peterson responded with convoluted stories about her youth. She suddenly remembered how she had volunteered for a development project in the 50s, how she had once swum across the Mississippi on a dare, how she had danced at a reception at the Austrian embassy. These stories were vivid, lively, but completely off topic. When my mother, seizing a moment, plaintively asked, "Mother, but is he at least an American?" Grandma gave her a look that, by Helen's own admission, sent a chill down her spine. "Helen, dear," Grandma said, cutting herself a piece of strudel, "in my day, it was considered bad form to be concerned with nationality. We were all just people. And Arthur, he is a citizen of the world." A citizen of the world, a new code name for our enemy. It sounded even more sinister than "makes the world brighter." Father, having heard the report, grew grim. His diagram on the paper now seemed less like a master strategist's plan and more like a desperate child's drawing. It was his turn to enter the fray. His plan was direct and simple, like himself, and was called the man-to-man talk. It involved Father simply lying in wait for Grandma near her apartment building and demanding an immediate meeting with this Arthur. "I'll tell him straight. What are your intentions, mister?" Father declared resolutely, putting on his trench coat. This sortie proved to be the most comical and, at the same time, the most disastrous. Father, after sitting for 3 hours in his car near Grandma's building, did indeed see her. But she was not alone. Walking beside her was a tall, elegantly dressed man in a fedora pulled low over his eyes. In his hands, he carried not a grocery bag, but a sleek leather briefcase. They approached the entrance, and just as Father decided to act, he leaped out of the car shouting, "Just a minute!" But whether from nerves or because he hadn't exercised in years, his foot got tangled in the seatbelt, and he sprawled with a clatter on the pavement, dropping his keys and his dignity. Grandma and her companion turned for a moment, and Father managed to see the stranger, tipping his hat, say something to Anne with a faint smirk before they disappeared inside. Father returned home dejected, with a torn coat and a bruised knee. He hadn't been able to see the face of the citizen of the world, but he was certain of one thing. The man smelled of success and danger. That evening, a sense of gloom pervaded our command center. All our clever plans had shattered against the granite wall of Grandma's secret. We knew absolutely nothing about her chosen one, except for a set of high-flown and meaningless epithets. And as we sat, crushed by our defeat, the phone rang. It was Grandma. "My dears," she cooed into the receiver, "I'd like to invite you over next week to introduce you to Arthur. I think it's time." We were stunned. She herself was offering the meeting we had been so desperate to secure. It felt like a trap, but we had no choice. We agreed. After hanging up, Father walked over to his chart, took a red marker, and boldly circled the last sentence he had written after his fiasco. "Subject is extremely cautious and may possess skills in professional tradecraft." Chapter 3. an evening of revelations and a smokescreen. The week leading up to the fateful introduction dragged on torturously, reminiscent of the lull before a decisive battle. Our war council convened daily. The atmosphere in the house was electric. Mother reread articles on geriatric psychology and manuals on exposing gold diggers. Father, having recovered from his fall, studied the penal code with renewed vigor, especially the articles concerning fraud on a grand scale, to which he, without a doubt, assigned Grandma's one-bedroom apartment. I, having despaired of finding anything online, took up archival research. I sifted through all the old photo albums, trying to find some clue in Ann Peterson's past, some hint that she was capable of such eccentric behavior. But the photographs only deepened our bewilderment. Here she was, young in a cotton dress against the backdrop of library shelves. Here she was with Grandpa, a smiling pilot in his dress uniform. Here she was with my father as a first grader. Everywhere she was the picture of calm and modesty. Nothing, absolutely nothing, foreshadowed the appearance of a citizen of the world in her life. On the appointed day, at 7 o'clock sharp, we stood at Grandma's door, dressed as if for a diplomatic reception. Father held a bottle of expensive cognac, which he intended to use either as an offering or as a weapon if the situation got out of hand. Mother nervously clutched a store-bought angel food cake, her last line of defense. As for me, I just felt my palms grow cold. The door opened. Grandma stood on the threshold, and she was different. Instead of her usual housecoat, she wore an elegant dark blue dress. Her gray hair, usually tied in a modest bun, was styled in a neat coif. And around her neck, sparkling in the chandelier light, hung a thin string of pearls we had never seen before. "Come in, my dears," she said, her voice holding unaccustomed velvety notes, and we entered. And there, by the window, stood him, Arthur Devereux. He was tall, slender despite the obvious silver at his temples, and impeccably dressed. A gray three-piece suit, a snow-white shirt, a tie of a restrained pattern. His face, etched with a network of wrinkles, was the kind one calls distinguished. But the main feature was his eyes, piercing, steel gray. They looked at us with polite curiosity and a hint of irony. He wasn't smiling, but the corners of his lips were slightly upturned, creating the impression of a constant, faint smirk. He took a step toward us, and I realized Father had been right. An aura of danger and absolute self-confidence emanated from this man. "Arthur," Grandma introduced him, "and this is my family, my son David, his wife Helen, and my granddaughter Catherine." "A distinct pleasure," he said, and his voice, deep and with a slight rasp, perfectly complemented his image. He shook Father's hand, and I saw David Miller, usually so self-assured, shrink back slightly. Then Arthur Devereux gallantly bowed to Mother, and taking her hand, lightly touched it with his lips. Mother blushed like a schoolgirl and forgot all her prepared trick questions. The evening began surprisingly smoothly. Arthur proved to be a brilliant conversationalist. He spoke of politics, art, economics, displaying astonishing erudition. Yet he managed to avoid giving a direct answer to any direct question. When Father, fortified by courage and cognac, asked him point blank, "So, what is it you actually do, Mr. Devereux?" he only smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say, David, that I am a specialist in resolving delicate problems. Sometimes one has to make the world cleaner so that it can become brighter." He used that phrase of his again, but now In his delivery, it sounded not naive, but sinister. We sat at the table, eating Grandma's signature potato salad, but the feeling of surrealism never left us. Here was our simple, understandable grandmother. Here was her modest apartment with a ficus in the corner, and opposite sat a man who spoke like a character from a spy novel. He told stories, amazing, captivating stories of his travels around the world. He spoke of the dusty streets of Cairo, the misty fjords of Norway, the bustling markets of Marrakesh. But in all these stories, he was merely an observer. Not a word about himself, about his role in these events. It was a masterful smokescreen, woven from exotic names and vivid images. At one point, I noticed him and Grandma exchange a look. It was not the look of two elderly lovers. It was the look of two accomplices, two people bound by a common secret, inaccessible to us, the uninitiated. And in that moment, I understood. We were losing. We were trying to play checkers while they were engaged in a complex game of chess. The climax came when Mother, emboldened, decided to strike her blow. "Anne," she began sweetly, "we are, of course, very happy for you, but you are so domestic. And Mr. Devereux's world, it's so big. Aren't you afraid?" Grandma chuckled. Not smiled her usual meek smile, but chuckled. "Oh, Helen, you'd be surprised, but I didn't always knit scarves and bake pies. In my youth, I had other hobbies." And then Arthur, picking up a small silver box from the table that I hadn't noticed before, opened it. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay an ancient, intricately shaped key. Anne was, and remains, one of the finest safecrackers I have ever known, Arthur said in his calm voice, especially when it comes to Swiss models from the 1940s. Silence once again filled the room, but this time it was not ringing but deafening. We stared at Grandma, at the key, at Arthur, and our world, so understandable and predictable, was cracking at the seams. We had come to expose a con man, and instead, it seemed we had just opened a door to a completely different, unbelievable reality, at the center of which stood our sweet old soul, Anne Peterson. Chapter 4. The Key, the Box, and the Ghost of the Past. Arthur Devereux's revelation about our grandmother's criminal talent plunged us into a state of near collective shock. The word safecracker, spoken in his velvety baritone within the walls of a standard-issue apartment, sounded so absurd that the brain refused to process it. Father, who had just been discoursing on the rule of law, froze with his mouth agape, resembling a fish cast ashore. Mother let out a soft gasp and gripped the armrest of her chair, as if afraid the floor was about to give way beneath her. As for me, I simply stared at my grandmother, trying to reconcile the image of a quiet old lady smelling of vanilla and mothballs with that of a dashing burglar of Swiss safes. The images would not merge. "Is this some kind of joke?" Father finally managed to stammer, nervously adjusting his tie. "David, I told you I don't like to joke," Anne Peterson replied reproachfully. She took the key from Arthur's hand and twirled it in her wrinkled fingers. The key was elegant, with an ornate head and a complex bit. It looked like a prop from an old movie. It was just one of my skills, useful in certain circumstances. Arthur Devereux watched us with his unchanging ironic smirk. It was obvious that our confusion pleased him. He was a puppeteer, pulling the strings, causing us, the puppets, to freeze in the most ridiculous poses. But, but why? How? Where? Mother stammered. You, you worked in a library. Exactly, Helen. And where else can one study lock blueprints and the theory of mechanics in peace and quiet? Grandma retorted. Books are the greatest source of knowledge, if you know how to use them. That evening destroyed all our plans. We had come with the intention of conducting an interrogation, but in the end, we ourselves were caught in the crossfire of facts that we couldn't wrap our heads around. The meeting ended. We left in complete disarray, seen off by the calm gazes of the two conspirators. At home, no one could utter a word. Father's diagram on the wall seemed a mockery. All our theories about a common gigolo had crumbled to dust. The situation was far more complex and tangled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The phrase safecracker haunted me. I decided it was a bluff, a clever hoax concocted by Arthur to throw us off the scent. But why? The answer was obvious, so that we would stop digging. And that meant there was something in their past that they desperately wanted to hide. And that key, it was too real. The next day, driven by a new theory, I went to Grandma's again. This time alone, without my support group. I found her watering her ficus. She was in her usual house coat, and the elegant lady from the previous evening seemed to have vanished. Grandma, I began as peaceably as possible, last night's conversation, it was strange. Why did you and Mr. Devereaux make up that story about the safes? Grandma looked at me with her faded eyes, in which something sharp as a needle flashed for a moment. Kate, dear, what makes you think it's a fabrication? She walked over to the old bookcase, pushed aside a few volumes, and pressed an inconspicuous spot on the wooden panel. Something clicked, and a section of the shelf slid aside, revealing a small, secret drawer. My heart stopped. Inside, on faded velvet, lay several strange objects. A set of thin metal picks, a miniature magnifying glass like a jeweler's loupe, and a small leather-bound notebook. But the main treasure was an antique wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Your grandfather, God rest his soul, was a pilot. But he didn't just fly test flights, Grandma said quietly, taking out the box. Sometimes he had to transport very valuable cargo and very delicate passengers. And I was his insurance. Sometimes locks didn't need to be opened, but on the contrary, made so that no one could ever open them, or to open what was not meant to be opened. She placed the box on the table. There was no visible lock or keyhole. This was a gift from a grateful passenger, from Geneva. He said it was impossible to open without knowing the secret. She ran her fingers over the mother-of-pearl pattern, and I heard a series of soft clicks. The lid of the box lifted with a faint hiss. Inside, on a cushion of black silk, lay an old, yellowed photograph. It depicted two people, a young, stunningly beautiful woman with my grandmother's eyes, and a young, dark-haired man in the uniform of an intelligence agency captain. They were standing against the backdrop of some southern city, and the man had his arm around the woman's waist. But the most shocking thing was not that. The man in the photograph was an exact, only 50 years younger, copy of Arthur Devereaux. Is that him? I whispered. Yes, Grandma nodded. His name was Arthur. He was your grandfather's handler and my first love. He was killed in '68, in Prague, on the line of duty. I looked at the photograph, at the young, vibrant Arthur, and at my young, happy grandmother, and felt the ground slipping from under my feet. The story was becoming more and more incredible. But who is this Arthur, then? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. This one, Grandma sighed, and an infinite weariness sounded in her voice. This Arthur Devereux, he's the one who has come to finish what the first one could not. He is his son. And he hasn't come from my apartment, my dear. He's come for the contents of this box. And I'm simply repaying an old debt. She closed the lid, and the pattern once again became just a pattern. A silence hung in the room, filled with ghosts of the past, spy secrets, and a love story that turned out to be far more dramatic than all the soap operas my grandmother loved to watch. I realized that my parents and I had not just been naive, we had been blind. We had lived next to a person whose life was a thriller novel, and we couldn't even read the summary. Chapter 5: Aligning Forces and the Last Gig. Grandma's revelation had the effect of a bombshell on me. I returned home, carrying this secret like a fragile and simultaneously incredibly heavy burden. My parents, noticing my altered state, immediately began their interrogation. Stumbling and getting confused, I recounted everything I had learned. About Grandpa, the secret agent, about Grandma, the safecracker, about the hidden compartment in the bookcase, the puzzle box, and finally about the two Arthurs, father and son, separated by decades and a single tragic story. The reaction was predictable. Mother fell into a near hysterical state, alternating between phrases like, "I knew it," and "how awful." She immediately envisioned hordes of spies besieging our landing and de-listening devices in the electrical sockets. Father, on the other hand, was stunned into a stupor. His world, built on logic, 5-year plans, and articles of the Penal Code, had collapsed in an instant. His own father turned out to be not just a test pilot, but some kind of American James Bond. His mother, not just a librarian, but her field partner with a set of lockpicks. This information simply did not fit into his worldview. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at a single point, then walked over to his chart on the wall and slowly, as if performing a ritual, tore it down and crumpled it. Operation Starlight was ingloriously over. That same evening, Arthur Devereux appeared at our apartment again. This time he came alone, without Grandma. His visit was businesslike and brief. He was no longer playing the role of the mysterious dandy. He was focused, serious, and exuded a cold determination. "I've come to clarify a few points," he said, declining the offer of tea. "Anne has told you the necessary minimum. I understand your confusion, but right now we need your cooperation, or at the very least, your non-interference." He spoke clearly and to the point, as if conducting a pre-mission briefing. It turned out that the secret puzzle box contained something far more valuable than an old photograph. There, under a false bottom that not even Grandma knew how to open, lay a microfilm. This microfilm, according to Arthur, contained information compromising a very influential European financial corporation that had built its fortune on collaboration with the Nazis and had skillfully laundered their capital after the war. Arthur's father, the agency captain, had almost uncovered the scheme but was killed. The microfilm which he managed to pass to my grandfather was his final report. This corporation still exists, Arthur continued, and the people who run it are the descendants of those same criminals. They are very keen that their history does not surface. For years, they thought the archive was lost, but recently there was an information leak. They found out that the key to the archive, that very box, is with Anne, and they are on our trail. Mother's eyes widened. So we're being followed? Followed is putting it mildly, Arthur cut in. Your mother is under heavy surveillance. That's precisely why I appeared in her life so publicly. My arrival and our relationship are a screen shed designed to distract them, to make them think I'm just after her inheritance. So they won't take decisive action until I figure out how to open this box. So that was it. The con man fiancé. It was a show they were putting on for prying eyes, and we, with our clumsy counterintelligence, had almost ruined it. Our investigation, our suspicions, our comical attempts to save Grandma, all of it was part of their brilliant plan. They had been using us without our knowledge. "But why don't you just give them the microfilm?" asked Father, his voice filled with genuine concern for his mother. "Because that would be a betrayal of my father and yours," Arthur answered sharply. "This information must be made public. It's a matter of honor. But to do that, I first need to get to the box and open it. And for that, I need your mother's help. She is the only person in the world who can do it. This will be her final performance." The plan Arthur outlined was daring and dangerous. He and Grandma were going to stage a robbery of her own apartment. While the robbers, Arthur's people, created a disturbance and distracted the observers, he and Anne would slip into the apartment, retrieve the box, and disappear. Our role in this play was simple: to act naturally and not panic. "Tomorrow evening," Arthur said, rising, "be ready. And remember, your mother's life depends on your composure." He left, leaving us to digest what we had heard. The world had been turned completely upside down. We were no longer a family concerned about a strange misalliance. We had become extras in a spy drama where the stakes were incredibly high. I looked at my parents. Mother, surprisingly, had stopped panicking. A steely resolve appeared in her eyes. Father was pacing the room, but now it was not a walk of a confused man, but the stride of someone making a decision. "All right," he finally said, stopping. "If it's a matter of honor, we'll help. Tell us what we need to do." At that moment, I realized that our family, so fragmented and bogged down in trifles, had managed to unite in the face of real danger. We were scared, but we were together. The longest night of our lives lay ahead, and we had to play our parts flawlessly. After all, what was at stake was not just the secret of an old microfilm, but the safety of the person most precious to us, our incredible grandmother, Ann Peterson. Chapter 6, The Finale, Ann Peterson's Benefit Performance. The night before the robbery was sleepless. We sat in the kitchen, drinking cold tea in silence. Each of us replayed the upcoming events in our minds, and fear, like a sticky web, enveloped our consciousness. Mother, contrary to my expectations, showed remarkable fortitude. She methodically compiled a list of things that must be saved first, which, in addition to documents, included her favorite violet and a collection of Dickens. Father studied the emergency evacuation plan for our building, which he had once drawn up for a civil defense drill. As for me, I just stared out the dark window, imagining enemy agents in every shadow, in every passing car. We were amateurs drawn into a professional game, and the price of a mistake was too high. The next evening at 9 o'clock sharp, our doorbell rang. It was the signal. Father, his face as pale as a sheet, went to open it. Arthur Devereux stood on the threshold. He was dressed in an inconspicuous dark jacket and a cap. "It started," he said curtly. "They're in position. My people will begin in 10 minutes. Your job is to sit tight and wait for my call. Anne is with me. She's fine, and she's on top of her game." He disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, and we were left to wait. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Then, from the courtyard below, came shouts, the sound of breaking glass, and the wail of a car alarm. The plan was in motion. Mother gripped my hand, her palm icy cold. Father stood frozen by the window, trying to make out something in the darkness. Judging by the growing noise, the robbery was in full swing. Neighbors began to peek out onto the landing, and frightened voices could be heard. The whole building was buzzing like a disturbed hive. And at that moment, in the midst of the chaos, the phone rang. I grabbed the receiver. "Everything's fine. We're inside." The diversion worked perfectly. Arthur's voice on the line was calm. "Now it all depends on her." And we waited again. I pictured my small, fragile grandmother down there in the quiet apartment 1 floor below, bent over the ancient box. Her fingers, accustomed to knitting needles, dancing over the mother-of-pearl pattern, searching for the secret springs. This was her benefit performance, her final and most important role. Another 20 minutes passed, feeling like hours. The noise outside gradually began to subside. Apparently, the police, called by terrified residents, had arrived. And then the phone rang again. "We did it," Arthur breathed into the receiver. "Kate, listen to me carefully. We're leaving now, but I can't take the box with me. It's too risky. I left it with you, in the safest place." "Where?" I whispered. "Your mother loves Dickens, especially Great Expectations, the 5th volume. Until we meet again." And the line went dead. I rushed to the bookshelf. I found the 5th volume of Dickens. It was slightly thicker than the others. I opened it. Inside, in a neatly carved-out niche, lay the box, and next to it, a small slip of paper. On it, in Arthur's calligraphic handwriting, were the words, "She opened it in 3 minutes. She's the best." An hour later, when everything had quieted down, the police came to our door. We gave our statements, pretending to be frightened residents. We said we hadn't seen or heard anything. And then Grandma arrived. A police officer escorted her by the arm. She looked bewildered and scared, clutching an old shawl and plaintively telling them that her family china and her pension money had been stolen. Looking at her, I couldn't believe that an hour ago, this woman had been cracking a highly complex safe. She was a brilliant actress. The subsequent events unfolded rapidly. 2 days later, Arthur came for the box. He said that he and Grandma were leaving. When asked where, he only smiled mysteriously. Somewhere warm, without drafts, and always had great expectations for a quiet retirement. Before leaving, Grandma hugged us all. "Well, now, my dears," she said with a sly smile, "you were so afraid a con man would trick me. Turns out your old grandmother can run circles around anyone herself." And they left. We never found out what happened to the microfilm or if the corporation was brought to justice. But a month later, we received a postcard from a small coastal town in Portugal. It showed a sun-drenched promenade. On the back were just a few words in Grandma's familiar handwriting. The wedding was a success. The world really is a little brighter. Love and kisses, your Anne. And then we understood. The wedding hadn't been a fiction. It was their real, hard-won happy ending. The marriage of two people bound not only by love, but by a shared perilous secret. Our family had changed. We began to see each other and the world differently. We understood that behind the most ordinary facade can hide an incredible story, and the quietest person can turn out to be a true hero. And I still sometimes walk over to the bookshelf, take the 5th volume of Dickens in my hands, and smile. Because now I know for sure that the greatest expectations sometimes come true in the most unbelievable ways, and that every grandmother has her secret. The most important thing is to realize in time that you're not a counterintelligence agent, but just a loving grandchild. And that, as it turns out, is more than enough. Stories are born from emotions. If this story evoked any feelings in you, share your thoughts. Every comment you make is a spark of inspiration for new stories about struggle, strength, and hope that does not fade, even in the harshest reality.